God laid out his plan to Abraham in a very straightforward manner. The plan was for the salvation of all humanity and not any particular group or ethnicity, but he would use Abraham and his offspring as the channel or vehicle to achieve it. The plan hasn't changed and won't ever be altered until every single bit of it is completed. It is his word and his law written down openly and clearly, allowing God to be judged against it. We are in fact invited to judge him next to his word. It is such an important plan that he reiterated it to Abraham's son and grandson. We've already discussed what was directly said to Abraham and his wife Sarah. Let's now look at what was promised to Isaac and Jacob. Combined, all three, Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, are known as the fathers of Israel. I'm Alan Anzik. Welcome to Coffee Table Discussions. This is my coffee table, this is my coffee, and coming up next is the discussion. Remember this? And he brought him, Abraham, outside and said, "Look toward the night sky and tell the stars, if you are able to count them." And he said to him, "So shall your seed be." And he believed in the Lord, and God counted it to him for righteousness. Well, he repeats the promise to the next generation. Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Notice any similarities between the promises God makes across three generations? To Abraham, "I will multiply thy seed as the stars of the heaven and as the sand which is upon the seashore. And thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies. And in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed." Then to Isaac his son, "And I will make thy seed to multiply as the stars of heaven, and will give unto thy seed all these countries. And in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed." And then to Isaac's son, Jacob, "And your seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and you will spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south. And in you and in your seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed." It doesn't look like God has any thoughts of changing his mind. These three generations represent the promises to the fathers of Israel. The fathers of Israel. Your seed will be like the stars if you can number them, or like the sand of the sea, a blessing to all the families of the earth. It was demonstrated to Abraham how the promise God had made would not be allowed to die. He would make whatever sacrifice was necessary. "And your seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and you will spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south." All of what God has intended for humanity has been written down plainly for every eye to behold in his prophecy. How could we have not seen this for the last few thousand years? Why didn't the religious leaders of Jerusalem 2,000 years ago understand the implication of God's promises to the fathers of Israel? It was their actual descendants that were spoken to. But even though God hid nothing from Abraham, we still ask, why doesn't God just give us a sign or show himself? Our blindness has been absolutely astonishing. A neon sign the size of the Empire State Building, surrounded by strobe lights and blasting trumpets. Actually, it describes this in Revelation chapter 4, 10, 16. The coming of the kingdom as roarings, thunders, and lightnings. Jesus, to his disciples, said, "As the lightning comes from the east and flashes and is seen across the heavens, so will be my coming." And the kingdom he has been building in the open for centuries now spans the globe. In the previous episode of this series, we saw a whole list of promises that were given to Abraham and his wife Sarah. Let's find out a bit more about the last two fathers of Israel. Let's look at the promise to Isaac. To do this, I'll take you on a short tour to the baptistery in Florence. And as the name suggests, that's the place where baptisms occurred back in the 11th century AD. when this one was purpose-built for that task. In this tour, we'll only be looking at the front door. Serves you right, you should have paid full price. The door is made up of bronze gilded panels depicting various biblical scenes, and we'll take a closer look at the middle one. And there we have Isaac's life in bronze relief. That's the three messages that came to tell Abraham that Sarah will give birth to Isaac within a year. Abraham on his knees pleading with them maybe, can you get someone else to do it? Sarah looking fine for a 90-year-old, however, must be the bronze gilding. She's peeking out from the tent. Apparently she overheard the conversation and laughed at the thought of giving birth. The messengers, which is another word for angels of the Lord, heard the laughing and weren't impressed by her lack of confidence in the plan that required her to become pregnant. Sometime later we see Abraham about to sacrifice Isaac, but is stopped cliffhanger style. And of course the lamb which Jesus told the religious leaders of Jerusalem was him, but they had no idea what he was talking about. But we know what he was talking about. Jesus would sacrifice himself for his Father's plan so that the seed of promise, Isaac, would not die and the great promise would have a future. Oh yes, the lads down here are the next generation. I don't know which is which, but they are Isaac's two sons, Esau and Jacob. Esau became the side issue and Jacob the line through which the promise would run. Where the donkey fits in, I'm not too sure. The great promise of salvation was made first to Abraham, but then God reiterated the promise to his son Isaac and then his son's son Jacob. But Isaac was himself a promise, and right from the get-go it looked like the promise would fail. Almost like a spoiler alert for centuries later when all of Israel disintegrated and Christ needed to come and rescue the plan. Happened. For a start, Sarah was barren and approaching 90 years old. The birth never should have happened. But a point was being made, which was that as improbable as it would eventually appear after the complete collapse of the kingdom, God had never ever had any intention of giving up on the work he had begun. God showed from the beginning that nothing would prevent him from finishing what was started. Isaac's unlikely birth is itself a parable and a lesson we need to remember today, even 4,000 years later, after completely distracting ourselves with concepts like personal salvation, which have focused our attention away from God's salvation and towards an obsession with ourselves. The lesson which has been so difficult for us to learn is that God doesn't change. The project doesn't change. Abraham had only one son. Hang on a minute. He actually had 8 sons in total from 3 different women. There they are, all in a row. So why did God say this? Lay not your hand upon the lad, Isaac that is, neither do anything to him. For now I know that you respect God, seeing that you did not withhold your son, your only son, from me. Out of his 8 sons, only Isaac and Ishmael are spoken of with any detail. But even so, Isaac is named the only son. It may therefore seem strange that Isaac is called the only son. But this was not to slight Abraham's other offspring, although if you were one of the other boys, you would probably feel a bit disappointed. What is being emphasized is the recognition that the promises to Abraham would be passed on through Isaac only. He was the child of promise. And God said to Abraham, in Isaac shall your seed be called. In other words, the promise would be filtered through Isaac's line. The other main son, Ishmael, is referred by the Apostle Paul as the child of the flesh, implying that Isaac is not of the flesh, but of the Spirit, a term which is the cause of some confusion as to what is of the flesh and what is of the Spirit. This is not, however, a question of biology versus mysticism. It is a question of what God chooses to work through, and in this instance, it was the seed of Isaac. So Isaac's seed is spiritual. Therefore, and please don't laugh, Great Britain is spiritual. because it is the work and the project that Christ is working with to complete the promise to Abraham and Isaac, and has nothing to do with how individuals within the kingdom act or behave. But we'll discuss more about the nature of spirit, flesh and blood, heaven and the kingdom in Series 3 when we arrive at that topic. God makes it clear by selecting the seed of choice who he will work through, and that takes us directly to Isaac's son Jacob and then his 12 sons, the houses of Israel. And as for Ishmael, I have heard thee, behold, I have blessed him, and will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation, but my covenant will I establish with Isaac, which Sarah shall bear unto thee at this time in the next year. Not too much further detail is given concerning Isaac. Jacob, however, has a lot more to say and to be said about. And you may be wondering why the British flag keeps making an appearance. Well, without giving anything away which hasn't already been discussed, the kingdom and all the tribes of Jacob disintegrated and became the talk of prophecy. Whether it be the bones Ezekiel saw rejoining together or the broken stick analogy where God vowed to reunite Jacob, the reunification of Jacob and the whole house of Israel is a prophetic obsession with God. And the Union Jack, of course, represents this. Jack is the anglicised derivative of Jacob. Jack, John, Jacob are all interchangeable, so the Union Jack could just as easily be the Union of Jacob. Now, of course, there's far more that can be added to what may otherwise seem acute coincidence in naming. And definitely at the time the term Union Jack was being coined, there was no evidence of the understanding of this relationship. But it certainly is what it is. And just as a bit of further interest, the Union Jack became a thing for the United Kingdom when England and Wales, Scotland and Ireland united under one sovereign in 1801. That's exactly 2,520 years after the tribes of Israel broke up and were carried off into captivity in 720 BC to begin their 7 times punishment, which is 2,520 years. See Appendix B of the reference text, God's duty. If you recall, Jesus said of Jerusalem after they rejected him the following: "And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led captive into all the nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled." And of course, we saw how the Jewish people were led away and expelled out of Jerusalem by the Romans to all the nations of Europe, and in fact the world, while Jerusalem remained in occupation until the times of the Gentiles were completed, which, if you recall, was in 1917, when the British Expeditionary Forces expelled the last of the Ottomans from Jerusalem, ending the times of the Gentiles, a full 2,520 years. Jerusalem, 604 BC to 1917 AD, 2,520 years, 7 times of the curse. Now, what Jesus spoke of Jerusalem being trodden down was only for Jerusalem and the Jewish people. But the tribes or the houses of Israel had been dispersed and started their curse almost 120 years earlier. They became the lost tribes of Israel and the lost sheep that Jesus said he was going to find and regather. Their diaspora began in 720 BC, and after their 2,520 years, we see the reunited house of Israel, the United Kingdom, once more with the very appropriate Union Jack. The lost and broken houses of Israel, beginning in 720 BC with their exile and ending 2,520 years later in 1801 AD. That represents 3.5 times of cursing plus 3.5 times of rebuilding, a total of 7 times. Just like Jerusalem, but with a better middle half. But we're skipping well and truly ahead of ourselves by a few thousand years. Back now to Jacob and the promise passed down to him from Isaac. "And God said, I am Jehovah, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land where you are, I will give it to you and to your seed." The actual land given to Abraham as a prophetic promise to his offspring was the land we know of as Israel. The limits promised to Abraham, however, stretched all the way from the Nile in Egypt to the Euphrates River. The same land was pledged to Jacob, and several centuries later, the sons of Jacob, or the houses of Israel, entered and occupied the land of Israel for the next 500 years. But then the kingdom collapsed and was conquered and divided and scattered and exiled for thousands of years. The promise at that point would have appeared to be a complete failure. The land would eventually be given back, however. The kingdom of God was never intended to be restricted to just the land given to Abraham. The house of Israel would not be confined. Their destiny was always intended as a far greater project. So when God reiterates the promise to Abraham, he is given further prophetic detail. "And your seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and you will spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south. And in you and in your seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed." God spoke to Jacob the same words he spoke to Abraham, and although more detail was added, it is the same story of the same vision that had been told to his father and grandfather. The seed of Jacob was to spread abroad to the west, east, north, and to the south. Jesus described the coming of his kingdom in a similar way. "For as the lightning cometh out of the east and shineth even to the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be." Matthew. The kingdom promised to the sons of Jacob is the same as Christ's kingdom. Why wouldn't it be? Seeing that specifically he came to finish his Father's work. The coming together of the houses of Israel into Britain is the planting of the Lord, and today this kingdom spans the whole earth. But the United Kingdom and her former colonies are not a replacement for the land originally given to Abraham. It is an extension of it. Having been rejected by Jerusalem, Jesus needed a different location to plant, grow, and restore the house of Israel. So he beckoned to the tribes in their exile, and those that came he led to a place of security where they would be nourished and called the planting of the Lord. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her own place, where she is nourished for a time, times, and half a time, 1,260 years, from the face of the serpent. Next week, Jacob and sons. God told Abraham that from his offspring would come nations and a kingdom that would be used to bring salvation to all mankind. In the next episode of the series, we will look at the composition of that kingdom through a raft of promises made to the 12 sons of Jacob, the 12 tribes of Jacob, and the 12 houses of Jacob. They're all the same thing really, but they became the bones of that kingdom God promised to build, the whole house of Israel. Oh yes, and we'll see how Jacob had his name changed, just to add confusion. His new name became Israel, but his old name Jacob is still used just as much. You'll get used to it. Jesus said, "Where 2 or more are gathered in my name, there will I be also." So let's take advantage of this offer and join in again next week for another coffee table discussion.